Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I just want to apologize. I'm a couple hours later than I like to be. Yesterday, I was out in California, right here near Visalia, and I was talking to a bunch of growers. And when we left, our flame was delayed about an hour. It was very interesting. When we left the Central Valley, though, we flew south and then came all the way over to Dallas, where I had my connecting flight that direction. And I wonder if they just avoided taking us over the top of the Sierra Nevada because of some very high winds that were in this particular area, and all because of this cutoff low that has moved across the region. But then when we got to Dallas, the storms last night, take a look at some of these big storms down here. They were really popping in the area, and I think this is what made Dallas an absolute mess. I got on the train at Dallas. The train was down for a little while. I don't know what's going on there. Usually Dallas Airport, I think it's a pretty great airport, but I had some trouble. So long story short, I didn't get home last night, so about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I tried to set an early alarm for an hour's worth of sleep, and it just didn't work. I need a little bit more rest. But, there's a lot going on, as Matt's been detailing the last couple of days in this pattern. We got to dig into this because I think some of the changes are going to be helping us inform maybe where the rest of harvest goes for the middle part of the country, the way that the West transitions wetter, and we got to keep an eye on this drought situation that's developing, and where I'm most concerned about it, which is across the South. So in the same breath, while these storms were quite disruptive coming through here, the rainfall that is with this low, which is cut off from the main flow, is critical for the drought scenario that is across parts of the South, the Delta, and getting into the Southeast, okay? I want to show you on radar here a couple of other fun things to point out. As these storms were showing up last night, bringing locally very heavy rainfall, we did note, and we talked about this earlier in the week, we do have the lake-enhanced rain that was coming across the Great Lakes here. And if you just take a quick look back at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precip, we can now see that the lakes had enhanced that precipitation quite a bit. It's very interesting. In fact, I hope you get to catch one of my winter talks this year. I'm actually talking about some of the history behind weather modification schemes that people had come up with, and one of the best ones is from a guy named Langmuir, who seeded clouds coming off of the Great Lakes and claimed major snowfall events back in the 40s. If you get to catch the talk, it's a lot of fun. Anyways, we're just looking at these rainfall amounts. We know that they're going to increase here, and they're also going to increase in the West. Now, to show you what's going on, this is kind of our bigger picture. We do have a deep low that is lingering off the Pacific Northwest coast. We're going to tell you more about that this weekend. We do have the low that will be forming. In fact, let's just step it up to 850. You'll see the circulation a little bit better. There you go. You're going to watch here just the transport of moisture out of the Gulf. That's going to help fuel some of the storms in the south. Plus, we have a decent front in there. A lot of cold air coming in on the backside of this deeper low that's way up here in parts of Quebec, the Canadian Maritimes. And we're going to be talking about Melissa. Melissa has, in its ability to just stall over very warm water with ideal conditions, is expected to rapidly intensify. But since I started off the day talking a little bit about flights, I do want to show you this. This is the jet extension we've been talking about for a couple of weeks. It's still there. It's still a feature. And we're going to continue to see the influence of this in the very near term. But I was curious, just looking at the speed of some of these winds here coming across the Pacific Ocean, just have a look at that, where the aircraft were. And I found this kind of neat. Flights that have left, Japan, for example, are flying in here. Flights that have left the United States are flying way up here to avoid it. And you can check this all out on FlightAware. So I was just watching, see how these aircraft coming toward the United States are south, and the ones leaving the United States are going to the north, and they're just trying to avoid the strong winds. And I get it. So I grabbed one of the flights because I always think this is fascinating. This particular flight right here, and it's going to Dallas, and it'll be interesting to see if it gets there on time, given there's still some inclement weather around that area. But what was fascinating was right now, as of this moment, when this updated, its planned speed was 566 miles an hour. Its actual ground speed is 659. But if you take it back, watch right here, okay? If I go back to earlier in this flight, right about, here, just as an example, this would have been when that flight was in this piece of the Pacific jet. The planned speed, again, was 566, and it was 758. Now, I know I mentioned this before in the past. That is, of course, breaking the sound barrier by a value, but the ground speed is, of course, different than the actual airspeed. You're moving with the jet stream pushing you at such incredible speed. So I just always find this fascinating. But the bigger picture is, as we look at all of these pieces together, is how do they fit and what's it going to mean across the country? So I know a lot of you are quite concerned up the East Coast about Melissa, and Melissa is becoming quite a powerhouse. But it's interesting this morning, too, pockets of very deep convection. But Melissa has been given a tremendous amount of time just to live in the Caribbean. And if you need to get yourself oriented here, there's Cuba, if that helps, right in through this area, and Jamaica. So let's have a quick look at what's going on here. We do have the tropical storm warnings out for Jamaica, but there's a lot of concern knowing that several models plus just the analysis has suggested that Melissa is going to quickly become a major hurricane. Now, by some metrics, we expect it to be up to Category 4 in strength. But earlier in the week, I think it was actually on a tweet put out by Jim Cantori, I saw a tweet he put out, and he started talking about this website. And I didn't know it existed, so I'm going to share it with you all. It's deepmind.google.com/science/weather lab, all one word. And when you get there, you have the option of turning on different hurricane forecasting metrics, and you can see them globally. Now, we're most concerned right here, so let's kind of zoom in. Man, this is a slick interface. I'm jealous of this. But now what we're looking at is multiple models, including the GraphCast model, which is an AI model, all projecting the eventual path of this tropical system. Now, if you wanted to see what Edward Lorenz discovered in, 1961 about how chaos works in weather forecasting systems, you're seeing it right here. So sorry, I don't know why that just cut off there, but we'll let it come back here when it restarts. What you're seeing here when you watch all of these different simulations are just small perturbations that we put into the model forecast to account for the fact that we don't have perfect initial conditions. And each model takes a different track of where this thing can go and also varies in the intensity. I mean, some of them blow it up to Cat 4 or Cat 3 and they rip across Cuba, creating a potentially massive problem. But model-to-model differences are going to be extreme. But this is one way by which we attempt to figure out, what is the most likely scenario. And as you can see, there are very, very few scenarios taking this into the Northeast, just a few model simulations that do that. So I have very low confidence that anything's going to hit the Northeast, but we're much more confident about the eastern side of Cuba. And this morning's European model is still attempting to put down here actually over Jamaica and onto this side of Cuba. We're maybe looking at 1 to 2 feet of rainfall. This will be a disaster in this area. Same thing for parts of the Bahamas. But as you just saw, different models have different solutions. And if we just go look at the newest, let's just go to the newest GFS. I mean, the GFS doesn't even have rain for parts of Jamaica. I mean, so your forecast could look like, 15 to 25 inches of rain of one model and nothing for another one. And that was the 6Z run. If we just go back to the 0Z run this morning, look at this. It even misses Cuba in the 0Z, which means deciphering the steering currents on this particular tropical system are extremely challenging right now. And we can rely on solutions like this, which then, of course, kind of take care of understanding what that uncertainty is. And you just kind of get to the end point, like, hey, where do we think it's going to go? And most of the model simulations put Cuba squarely in the crosshairs. Same thing for Jamaica. So just please be aware that we are looking at a significant disaster in this area due to what's coming through. All right. From there, let me take you back to just quickly what's going on in the United States. Big system hitting the Northwest. We do have the winter storm, weather advisories here. Strong winds, parts of the Columbia Basin, Oregon, and getting into this section of Northern California, and also here in parts of Montana. I expect those to expand as we go forward. We have flood watches out that are kind of on either side of the Red River. And as Matt's been talking about all week, the cold air that's in place here is prompting these frost and freeze warnings. And this is not uncommon. It's just the first time of year that we're getting these really cold temperatures into this area consistently. And that's why the warnings are going out. In the future, when we get this cold, the National Weather Service won't do this anymore. We don't need to warn you about freeze events after we've had our first few freeze events. That's the big idea here. But you can see this gets all the way to the East Coast, into the parts of the North Carolina, Virginia, and it's common in most of North Carolina, especially the eastern half, to have your first frost once you get into November. But the farther west you go, it's earlier and earlier. This is an elevation-driven thing in Virginia, North Carolina. Okay, here's what I want to talk about. We do know the jet extension is going to hit the Northwest, and some of these rainfall totals are large. You do also note that we have the low that's sitting here that's going to move through, and it's going to have a complement to it with another system that's rolling in from the north. But there are areas that we're expecting to not have much rain, and we need to talk about those just as important. I'm thinking about a lot of Montana. I'm heading to Billings early next week, And they're very concerned about what this winter is going to bring. And they should be, given the way that the season has panned out so far. You also take note of the dryness that's in the southwest. This is also another major winter concern, simply because La Niña winters typically fail to produce consistent subtropical jets, which means we have to rely on the polar jet dipping down south to really hit this whole area with better moisture. But seeing all this come through is just exactly what I want to see. And here's the reason why. If I just showed you month-to-date precipitation ranks, where we have flood watches out right in through here is one of this area is extremely dry. And to see this move into the southeast, we've been talking about the drought risk that's in parts of the southeast, and we need to keep an eye on how that unfolds. And the Mississippi's low. We've talked about it extensively, so I've got to get moisture into this area. And we do note that some of the recent rains have peeled back on some of the drought area, but we still have a significant portion of the United States in drought. In fact, I'm curious. I should have looked this up before we started, but let's look at the timeline, zoom in on the very end here, and just to get that percentage. Yeah, we came down from 74 to 72%. So there's been some improvement, and those improvements, if you come up here to maps, you can click on change maps, and you can see the one class improvement color. Here and here, a lot in the west. Remember, we've had multiple cutoff lows that have come through here, including one this week. Now, when I was actually out driving on the interstate to get to from Fresno to Visalia, they had flood road signs because of some of the recent rains that came through. But there have been areas that have seen some degradation, and we can't ignore those as well. Okay, so details here. We do note that today and tomorrow, and even getting into Sunday, there is, as this thing slowly moves, there's this risk of severe storms to the south. This is also where we have our greatest risk of the excessive rainfall, as you can see over the next 3 days. Zooming in on what's going on here, this is the upper level vorticity pattern. Really, it's the mid-level vorticity pattern. And I kept calling this cutoff, and here's the reason why. The main flow is doing this. Okay, there's another little wave there too. Deeper wave in the northeast, but this is what we're talking about. It's cut off from the main flow, so it doesn't have anywhere to go. Nothing's pushing it along, and it's going to just sit there and spin its way toward the mid-south, and that's what's giving us the good long duration chance of getting the moisture in. Now, you are noting this is the northern system I was telling you about. There's something coming through, and it's big, and we're curious about what that's going to do on the 28th and 29th and then 30th, because we now start to see this ridge building behind a very, very elongated ribbon of vorticity wrapping its way around a deep Great Lakes low on Wednesday. And that particular system is going to be important to watch because of the timing it has with when Melissa comes through the Bahamas. Now, if that front there just knocks it out, good, hooray. But there's another system following this on October 30th that wants to dig into the east. And that's a pair of lows leading up to Halloween, which I think is going to just bullseye some cold air into parts of the south, which Matt was talking about quite a bit, while there's a big warm-up and a much drier pattern following this into week 2. So here it is. This is starting off this morning about 8 o'clock, the simulated radar from the NAM model through this afternoon and this evening. So we've got our kind of 3 pieces here. More lake effect on the backside. We have our little shortwave to the north. We have the bigger cutoff low that's here, and then the front from the very deep low that's coming into the Pacific Northwest. Where are we in time? This is Friday night. This is tonight. Getting our way into Saturday morning, Saturday midday, getting into Saturday evening now. As that low just lives cut off in the flow, this one's deep. Strong winds, heavy rains along the coast, and it's going to ride up over the top of this. So we're at Saturday evening here, getting into Sunday. And did you notice that's 3 days of just watching this slowly work its way toward the lower Mississippi River Valley. And we're going to keep a close eye on rainfall totals out of this. If I compare the GFS to the European, which is what we're going to do next, we'll see the same things. The model's in pretty good agreement through the weekend with those same 2 low pressure systems. As one exits east, the big one comes into the west. There will be some snow out of that, as you can see. But the interesting thing is, where they were disagreeing yesterday, they're in a little bit better agreement today as this rain moves over parts of the Carolinas into the mid-Atlantic. Now, take note of this. The GFS is already bringing out Melissa at this point, meaning there's going to be interaction with that low that just came across and Melissa. It's nowhere to be found in the Euro over here on the right. But the Euro does drop in another deep, deep low into British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest, as you see. But they have very similar views of that big ribbon of vorticity I told you about and where its placement's going to be. And that's going to be critical to the temperature and moisture pattern of this low that curls its way up the East Coast. Now, What'll be very interesting is to note if there is any interaction between Melissa and the low that's going up the East Coast. If there's a model that suggests there could be, even though it's very loose and there's quite a bit of distance, it's the GFS. The European doesn't do it. But both models produce, as we get into next Wednesday, a deep low that moves through the northeast. And there's going to be some snow with this, I think. I think we're going to have enough cold air to get some snow at elevation. Meanwhile, another low hits the northwest. And now the European unloads Melissa. Do you see the difference here? Melissa is gone and off the screen in the GFS. Oh, it's just now coming out down here in the European model. Now, as we get past week 1, we're now out into next Friday, the 31st. My concern is cold here, lake effect showers on the backside, another big low in the northwest. That's kind of what we're looking at for trick-or-treating, all right? But as we play it forward, things start to change quite a bit as we get fully into that first week of November. And I think some heat's going to be returning in the west, in the central U.S., and some cold is going to linger in the east. But let's kind of just look at some of the tools we've got on ag weather so that you can assess your rainfall. Now, you can go into your local weather forecast. I mean, that's just up here at the top. Click on local weather, drop a pin. By the way, I broke the RAPI. I'm really sorry for this. 2 days ago, I was messing around with it. I shouldn't have been, and I broke it. So I'm sorry for those of you that came in and were wondering why you couldn't see anything. But it's up. It's fixed. I put new safeguards on it, so I apologize for that. But if you come down here, look at our model spread, the 5 model spread. Very, very useful set of metrics. When we look at who's not going to get the rain, this is the drier areas. So take note of the rain shadow effect in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and parts of Montana and Wyoming. The southwest is very dry in this pattern. So where you see white is where we're expecting wetter conditions over the next 10 days or so. As we get out there farther, this is the pattern on Halloween, and this is why I think we got the cool risk here. There's a trough in place. There'll be northerly and more westerly winds behind it, and it'll be unsettled weather, but the big rebound in heat coming here while the Pacific Northwest is probably going to deal with a wave coming off of the base of this guy, monstrous low in the Gulf of Alaska. So that puts your week 2 pattern, if you just follow it, okay? There's a whole lot of convergence in the jet stream here, okay? It's not summer anymore. Northwest flow is cold and dry. So what we're thinking about here is that the week 2 pattern, all the models kind of look the same. And they all kind of mimic what the Climate Prediction Center says. Let's just zoom in on the Euro. So, all right, there's the tail end of the system around the deep low in the Gulf of Alaska. The ridge is opening up. It is drier, but it's also cooler on this side. Now, bigger picture, longer range. Let's do a quick model comparison, and then I'll get into some more of the details about this in a second. This is the new outlook. It's a 30-day outlook from the 27th of October to the 27th of November. And I want you to have a look. This is the GFS extended. I'm learning more and more that this GFS extended model, if it's going to make an area dry, it tends to be aggressively dry. Whereas, as you know, the European model likes to just wash out details. But they are both consistent with this. And one of the big things we are not seeing is any sort of subtropical jet developing. So we're relying entirely, if we just go back to it here, on these things. Strong, Pacific, northward-oriented jet pieces, if you will. So that's why we're wetter here, and we see systems here, and they exit there. Now, it doesn't mean there won't be rain here. It's just suggesting that as we get out there farther into the month of November, the likelihood of there being above average rainfall is low in this area. Now, all it takes is one simple shift. Instead of having the jet come in like that, if it just comes in like this, or if it reorients and somehow comes in like that, this is all gone. That is gone. And I'll just tell you that's a possibility given the meanderings we've seen of the jet stream. So this is the current forecast by the Euro, and I think we just need to understand it as a baseline going forward. Okay, back to the near term temperatures. Certainly we've knocked out this very, very warm bias we've had for most of the month. In the west, your temperatures will be changing here pretty soon. You're going to start to see some warmer conditions return. Texas, I think you just stay warm. I know we got some rain coming through, but I think you just stay warm. If you look at this morning's early morning temperatures, you're already quite warm down here. There's a lot of cooler air in the Intermountain West, and there's the cold air on the backside of that low, just dropping these temperatures like a rock here. And I didn't catch this at sunset. I told you I'm late, but it's 7:50 a.m. in the central U.S. where we're recording this. And still quite cool there. All right, frost risk over the next 7 days. I don't think there's any surprises here. We've kind of watched this evolve all week. And if we get out there and just look at what the high temperatures are doing, this is as we get into Saturday and Sunday, deep low comes into the west. That's the cool down. Then we work our way forward. This is now Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. What we start to see is a warm up here, because at this particular point, the jet is, it's basically, you saw it's doing this and then digging that deep low here by the time we get out toward, Halloween. So if you want to see it, it looks something like this. I don't usually show you this version of it, but it's a sliding 1-day window of temperature anomalies. We're going to be adding this to the Ag Weather website very soon. So there's the cold weekend coming into the Northwest, the warm up in the central part of North America. We're now out there to next Wednesday, Thursday. There's the cool down late next week. Where is it? It's all anchored into the Mississippi, Ohio Valley, and where it kind of corners off the southeastern part of the United States, including, of course, the Appalachians. So that's getting cool while the West is warming back up. And the question is this particular pattern as we look out there now into the first full week of November, knowing it's cooler here, and then we watch it try to open back up with warmth, is this what we would expect? Now, Matt had mentioned this, and many of you had asked me about this. I forget, was it John? Someone in the comments earlier this week said, hey, talk about the MJO more. I got to be honest with you. I was at the conference out in California yesterday, and I had a guy come up to me, and I'm sorry I forgot his name, but he's like, hey man, when are you going to dig back into the MJO? I think it's moving. And you all do not know how awesome I think it is that you are asking about the MJO to me and Matt and Andrew, because I love it that you're consuming weather information the way we do. I mean, this is a major motivator of the atmosphere over the Indian and Western Pacific Ocean. And we got a couple of different simulations. Now, right now, it's popped out into phase 4, according to the BOM's Access S2 model. And they expect it to collapse and maybe come out maybe somewhere 5, 6. But if you have a look at what the European model's doing, they've got it way farther out into 4, sweeping through 5, and living in 6 by the time we get, out there pretty far into November. So let's try to make sense of this. If the MJO is working its way at the beginning of November into phase 5, everything we just told you kind of makes sense, right? Look where the deep lows typically are, here and here. That is the pattern you just saw me describe, which seems to me to be that the MJO's current movement is giving us that early November outlook, which is more mild west, drier central U.S., and then deep lows in the Northeast. That makes sense. But what happens if we just let this progress into phase 6? Well, the good news about it is it's a progressive pattern. Now look, we have flow returning to the west, a ridge opens in the central U.S., and the trough that was east moves. And so what I'm telling you here is that to make a case for just a stuck pattern when the MJO is jumping like it is, you can't do it. It's going to be open. It's going to be moving. There's going to be some regularity to the weather. The one thing I'm worried about, though, is that this is still polar jet stuff, not subtropical jet stuff. And that's why I'm still concerned about parts of the Sunbelt, Cotton Belt, Southeast staying drier in this. Now, there's another piece to it as well. So let's just talk about the MJO related to the La Niña. Normally, when the La Niña is going, which it is, we have strong trade winds here. We do still have a negative Indian Ocean dipole. That's colder there and warmer there. That means the flow goes like this. So what we tend to get is just get, on a grand synoptic scale, rising motion here. That's phase 4, 5, 6. Now, one thing that I'm not going to include in this analysis is we're now at another week where the trend has been way down across the North Pacific. And that's going to come majorly into play when we get fully into our late fall and winter time period. But as it stands, I want to remind you of something. When we look at the correlation between the MJO and El Nino La Nina, when there is a La Nina, we tend to get a lot of rising motion here. That's our best. Why? Because strong trade winds meet westerly wind bursts, and there's just rising motion out of the board right there. Okay? So knowing that, if we tend to spend a lot of time there, for example, in December, we tend to get something like this. Phase 4, the beginning of it, all right? A lot of ridginess. See this? Trap all the cold air to the north. Could we get more of those cutoff lows out of California? Sure. Not a bad thing. But if you go on and you say, what about phase 5? Well, phase 5 tends to prefer ridges in the west. And then you get out there to phase 6, and those ridges tend to live in this area. So we tend to split the country, cold east, warm west, if, and this is a big if, if La Nina dominates, I don't know that it's going to. Let's go back to it here. I think there's so much more to the story happening to the north that needs to be considered, and what is going on in the Atlantic will also need to be considered in December. The Arctic Oscillation, the North Atlantic Oscillation, all of these things can really change this up. But your pure MJO La Nina scenario gives you that progression. So could that mean a cold east start to winter, warm west, and then possibly if La Nina dies early, it flips? I don't know. Sure. That is definitely a possibility, but one I cannot put a lot of stock in just yet. We just got to let the story evolve, okay? So to remind you of one other thing, when you correlate November to January, a multivariate INSO index, in other words, El Nino, La Nina, I've kind of tried to change the color bar a bit so that you can see dry versus wet areas. For example, we notice that we tend to have more Pacific ridges here. We tend to have no subtropical jet there, and the flow comes best over the top, keeping this area wet and this area wet, and that seems to be how the early pattern sets up. We tend to be drier in the plains, drier in the south, drier in the southwest. Mexico's drier. Southeast is drier. Now notice, these correlations are not here. They're in here, which means this is not a guarantee. Same thing for South America. You can look else around the world. Pause the video and have a look. But as you look at it, we just tend to be drier southern Brazil, Argentina, wetter north, or near normal to the north, the center west as an example. Now, as of late, we've had monsoonal storms in here. The last week or so, look, we're seeing monsoonal type rains, but they shut off the last couple of days. If I get this playing here, we've had, because of a shift around in something called the Antarctic Oscillation, or the Southern Annular Mode, it's got a couple different names, just better moisture into Argentina, but not a whole lot being observed here across Brazil's main growing areas. Sorry, this animation's not running very smoothly for you. Our models are still doing their same thing. Here's the European model, week 1. This is out fully 10 days. So yeah, for the next 10 days, there's rain in here, but it is drier. Very wet, Mato Grosso, do Sul, Paraná. It's wet coming through Santa Fe into Uruguay, even parts of Buenos Aires out of Cordoba. That's your next 10 days. Week 2, the European starts to bring back normal rains into a lot of Brazil. Therefore, if you put it over the whole next 2 weeks, it is drier than average here because of most of the next 10 days, but there's some rainfall coming into week 2. Now, the GFS is like, no, this is not what's going to happen. The GFS has something similar to the next week. So wetter and wetter, okay, close. This is 10 days out. That's week 2, though. It's like, yeah, I see more precipitation here in Brazil's southeastern growing areas, but not in some of the key states. And so it is much drier. So you want to compare the two? Because I use the same historical database to compare to. That is the GFS Ensemble 14-day forecast. There's the European. Much different scenarios here. And they just keep doing this. Like, that's the GFS extended all the way through November the 27th. Very dry Paraguay, Uruguay, Rio Grande do Sul, and a lot of northern Argentina. Wet, Minas Gerais over here, and then dry in the interior. And the Europeans like, no, you got it wrong. It's very wet into this area. It's only dry down in Rio Grande do Sul and northern Argentina. So if there's consistency, it's there. I think those of us that care about the commodities Brazil grow need to watch this next 30-day time period very carefully. And I'll look forward to seeing their update this afternoon on their planting progress. All right, these are the stories we're going to carry through the weekend. And I appreciate you giving me a little bit extra time to grab an extra hour of sleep this morning. And we'll just pick everything back up on Monday. Take care.